Hi, welcome back to the channel. In this video, you will learn everything you need to know about the 3D Maps functionality of Microsoft Excel. Now I have created a tutorial on how to create a simple 2D map chart using Microsoft Excel. In case if you haven't checked that out yet, you can click on the link that's appearing on the top right corner of the screen to check that tutorial out. However, in this video, we will be fully covering the 3D Maps functionality of Microsoft Excel, which is simply a tool that lets you look at various types of geographical information with a completely new perspective. Everything you need to know will be explained using practical examples with real-life datasets, so that it'll be much easier for you to quickly grasp what each of the different functions are actually designed for. And I have also added timestamps, so in case if you would like to skip around here and there, feel free to do so. But I assure that you watching the entire tutorial all the way to the end systematically will increase the chances of you grasping the key points greatly. So out of the different datasets that I'll be using for this tutorial, this is the first dataset that I'm going to discuss with you guys. Over here, we can see that we have two columns. The first column is the country and the second column is the nominal GDP in thousands of US dollars. And these are actually the countries in the African continent. So what you see is basically the nominal GDP of the countries in Africa in thousands US dollars. By the way, just as a side note, you can get this kind of data quite easily from Wikipedia. And even for this example, I extracted this data from a Wikipedia page, which happens to be this, the list of African countries by GDP. And a not so glamorous way of actually extracting data from a Wikipedia page, especially from tables, would be to simply try to select this table and trying to paste it back, and that's actually going to cause a lot of issues, especially with the formatting and stuff. So if you're using Microsoft Excel, one of the easiest ways to extract data from a web page, especially a page like Wikipedia, would be to head over to Data, and from here we can click Get Data, and from here select Other Sources from Web. And all you have to do is simply copy the URL into this box that you're seeing right over here. So we can just copy this URL and paste it over here and click OK. And Microsoft Excel will actually be able to extract those corresponding tables for you just in a matter of few seconds. Now over here you can see that it identified a couple of different tables. What you can do is you can head over to each of these and see which is the one that's relevant to you. Now, for example, if I click over here, you can see that it has extracted one table that is not necessarily what I'm looking for, but if I head over to table 0, you can see that this is exactly the data table that I was looking at just a couple of seconds ago. So I don't even need to bother about going through the other tables. All I have to do is just select this table 0 and click on load. And just like that, it'll extract the data table for us along with the proper formatting. So I guess that was a quick helpful tip in case if you didn't know that. So the GDP data that I extracted came directly from this table. So we'll head back to that data table and continue on with our tutorial. So when you would like to visualize this kind of information on a 3D map, what you can do is you can first select everything and you can head over to Insert, and from here you can click on this 3D Maps button, and from here you can select Open 3D Maps. And you will see this kind of a separate window opens up. And in this tutorial, we are actually going to cover almost everything that you can see over here. These are different tools. And over here on this panel to the right side, you also can see a couple of different options. We're actually going to cover all of these different functionalities during this tutorial. And I'm going to do that with unique examples, which will actually make the whole understanding process much easier for you guys. So we'll get started by exploring this panel to the right side. You can see that there are three drop-down menus over here. If I shrink this, you can see that there is this drop-down menu called Data, Filters, and Layer Options. So we'll first have a look at what this Data drop-down menu does. And under Data, you can see that there are different types of charts that we can make use of. So in Microsoft Excel 3D Maps, you have the option to play around with 5 different types of charting methods, which are stacked columns, clustered columns, bubbles, heat maps, and regional maps. So I'm going to cover all of this, but not necessarily in this order. In fact, for our very first example, I'm actually going to get started with the regional map visualization that you can see over here. And right over here, you can see the place to specify the location. Now, the cool thing with Microsoft Excel 3D Maps is that it's actually powered by Bing Maps, as you can see by the logo over here. So for Excel 3D maps to understand a location, you don't necessarily need to specify anything other than the name of the location. Now the name of the location can be given in different ways. And for this example particularly, the way how we specify the name of the location happens to be by the name of the country. So I can add a field simply by clicking on this button, or as long as this field list card is on display, I can simply just drag this country field and place it over here. In case if you do not see this, most likely this field list button has been turned off, so you can turn that on by clicking over here, and that will actually show you the different types of fields or different columns that are available in the dataset that you specified. So in this case, you can see we had two columns, the country and the nominal GDP value. So to specify the location, all I had to do was drag this and drop it over here, or I could have simply just clicked on this add field button and I could have selected the country field as well. If you click over here on this drop down menu, you can see a wide array of different ways that are available for you to specify a location in Microsoft Excel 3D Maps. So if you happen to have the name of the city instead of the country, all you have to do is select city over here. But in this case, you can see that since we have the country, we have selected this option country/region. And you can even go to levels like providing the street or providing the postal address or even the full address. And even you have the possibility of providing a custom region in the form of a KML file or a shape file. And if you're talking about point locations, you can even provide the XY coordinates of the corresponding location as well, or in other words, latitude and longitude information. And Excel 3D Maps will actually be able to understand the location as a point location if you were to do that. So as soon as I dropped this country field under this location box, you can see that it actually plotted a point on each of the different countries. That means it has actually successfully identified the countries of this dataset that we discussed before. And you probably might be wondering, what if we have a country which has been misspelled? Will Bing Maps be still able to understand even if there are spelling errors or entries that might not necessarily make sense? So that's what you can see over here by this number. And if this is 100%, that means that Bing Maps was actually able to understand all of the different entries provided by you in terms of its geographical location. However, you can see that right now it's only 98%. That means there are entries that Bing Maps was actually not able to understand when it comes to accurately identifying its geographical location. So before you proceed with any of these, what we can do is we can actually try to see whether we can rectify those. And it's quite convenient in the sense that when we click over here, it'll show us exactly what it was not able to understand as a country or a region. So over here, you can see that there happens to be one entry called total. And of course, it's not going to understand what total means in terms of a country or a region. So that's why it was not able to understand that. So what we can do is we can minimize this window for the time being. And we can maybe head over to the bottom of this table, and right over here you can see the culprit. It was not able to understand what this one means. So I'm just going to get rid of this. And after that I can head back to the 3D Maps window. And you can see that even if we got rid of that particular row, still this number doesn't change. So what that means is that if you happen to make any changes in the original data table that we specified, for those changes to take place on your 3D Maps window, you always have to refresh the dataset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click over here on this refresh data button. And as soon as I do that, you can see that this actually changed back to be 100%. That means it was very confidently able to understand all of these different countries in terms of its geographical location. So that's how you deal with this location panel. And now you can see that there's another option called height. So in this case, if I happen to just click over here, what I can do is I can select nominal GDP as the height option, and immediately what you can see is these different points that you saw previously got extruded outwards from the map, and now it has created some sort of a column like this. And now what we are going to do is we are going to head back to these different 5 types of charts. And as I told you guys, I'm going to revisit this stacked columns option in one of the upcoming examples, but I'm going to get started by discussing how we can create a regional visualization using this set of data. So I'm going to click over here on this button, and immediately what that does is it's actually going to create this kind of a color scale, which you can see over here on this legend. And over here on this legend, you can see what each of these different colors actually mean. So on the left end of the color bar, what you can see is basically the minimum nominal GDP, and on the right side, it's the maximum nominal GDP. The countries which has been assigned these kind of light blue colors are actually representative of countries which are having relatively lower GDPs. However, the countries which have been highlighted by this dark blue color, we can visually see that right off the bat that there are three countries which are having quite high GDP relatively compared to the other countries, which happens to be Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa. And the other cool thing is that if you hover your mouse pointer over here, you can see that this kind of a small data card gets displayed. So the type of information that you can see on this data card are basically the country and the nominal GDP, which again happens to be the two columns that we had in our initial data table. And if you go over here to these layer options, you can make changes to the color scale. So if I slide this to the right side, you can see that the color scale actually changes a bit. If you draw your attention to the color bar on the legend, you can see that if I slide this to the right side, the darker blue colors actually spread to the left side as well. So that if I keep on doing this, you will not really be able to distinguish between the countries that are having low GDPs and high GDPs, because everything will get colored in dark blue colors. But if I were to slide this to the left side, you actually can manually control how the gradient should get applied across all of these different values. And of course, you can change the opacity. If I slide this to the left side, you can see that the opacity decreases, but I would like to keep this at 100%. And you actually can change the color scale simply by clicking over here on this drop down menu. And from here, you can basically select any color that you wish to have. For example, if I go with red, you can see that now the countries with low GDPs are actually highlighted in light red colors, whereas these three countries again are highlighted in dark red, so that it instantly gives us a proper visualization of the countries that are having relatively high GDPs in the African continent. And also you have the option of customizing the data card. For example, you can see that when I hover my mouse point over here, this is how the data is displayed by default. But if you click over here on this customize data card button, you get a couple of different options where you can customize this. Now this is the default template that it was using, but you also have the options to go through different types of templates. For example, if you would like to have this formatted in this kind of a way, you can use template 3, or you can use template 4, directly display the value over here and the nominal GDP value over here. And I think for this tutorial, I'll stick with template number 3. And if you happen to have multiple fields, you can either add or remove fields as you wish from here. Now in this case, you can see that we have just 2 fields. Now if I happen to remove this nominal GDP field by clicking over here on this X button, and if I click OK, what you see is just the name of the country and not the GDP value anymore. However, if you want to put that back, you can click over here on this customize button again and click on this plus sign. And from here, you will be able to add this one as well. And with that, you will be able to see the nominal GDP value as well. Alright guys, I think it was clear for you guys how to do regional visualizations using this Microsoft Excel 3D maps. And now what we are going to do is we are going to head over to another dataset that we will be using to discuss these 3 types of maps: the stacked columns, the clustered columns, and the bubble type visualizations of Excel 3D maps. So I'm just going to close this map. And by the way, every time when you open a 3D map, it just gives you this indication that this workbook has some 3D maps available. You can just decide to either keep it, or if you do not really want to have this displayed on your worksheet, you can just simply select this and get rid of this by deleting it. And this is the second dataset that I'll be using for this tutorial. And over here you can see that we have the same set of countries over here, but now additionally what we have is the estimated population in year 2015. Again guys, this data were extracted from one of the Wikipedia tables. In case if you wish to do so, you can try that out as well. And over here we still have this nominal GDP column. So now since you guys are familiar with how to open the Excel 3D maps, what we can do is we can select this entire table and head over to Insert, go to 3D Maps and select Open 3D Maps. And the cool thing with these 3D maps is that even though you happen to close the previous 3D Maps window, you can see that the map is still there. So you can simply go ahead and access this map if you wish to, but if you would like to get rid of this, you can just click over here on this X button and that'll delete your previous map. And I'm just going to select over here a new tour, and that's going to open up a completely different 3D maps window for me. And under range 1, what you can see is basically the dataset that's corresponding to this sheet number 2 that we are working on currently, which has 3 different columns or 3 different data fields as displayed right over here. And in this case, you can see that by default, it has automatically identified that this country or territory column is corresponding to this country/region item. And with that, you can see that it has plotted this kind of a dot for the territories or countries that it managed to identify as different geographical regions. And over here for this height item, I'm going to add the nominal GDP as well as the population. So as soon as you do that, you can see that similar to what you saw before, this kind of a legend gets opened up, which you can resize and position it according to your preference. By the way, I could have just simply maximized this so that I would have more space to actually play around and move these different items. And the type of column which has been selected by default is this stack column over here. And that's why if you happen to move the globe and if you use your scroll wheel to actually zoom in, you can see that this kind of a column has been created. By the way guys, it should be self-explanatory that you can use these different buttons to navigate around the globe. If you want to zoom in, you can click over here on this button and zoom out. And you can rotate the globe around using these up, down, left, right buttons over here. But honestly guys, if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, I think that would be the most convenient way to actually navigate around. If you click on your left mouse button and just move it around, you can see that you can just as easily rotate the globe just like this. And whenever you want to zoom in or out, just use your scroll wheel and you'll be able to do it quite comfortably like this. And coming back onto these different items, you can see that the 2 items that we specified over here have been added to this legend. And if I zoom into Egypt like this, you can see that the column that's on the top is the nominal GDP column and the column that's on the bottom is this population column. But in case if you would like to switch these around, over here you can see that now the nominal GDP column has been stacked on top of the population column. But let's say if you have multiple entries and you would like to reorganize them to have a certain entry of your preference to actually stack on top of the others, you simply can head over to this height box over here, select the item and you can move it swiftly around just like this. Now in this case, if I want to stack population on top of nominal GDP, I'm going to move it to the top, and when I release the left mouse button, you can see that the order actually got changed. Now the population is displayed on top of the nominal GDP. And similar to what you saw before, if you open up these layer options, you will see actually a variety of different options that you can use to change how this appears visually. So for example, you can change the height, and what happens when you change the height is that all of the different columns are actually getting increased linearly, so that with respect to each other, it'll still maintain the differences. So that even though the total height of the column increases, it'll still maintain the differences with respect to each other, which can visually tell us which countries are actually having high nominal GDPs and populations, and which countries happen to have those values to be quite low. Similarly, we can increase the thickness as well by sliding this over to the right side. What it does is it's actually increasing the thickness of the column. And of course, the opacity is quite self-explanatory. You can increase or decrease the opacity like this, and you're not really limited to this blue and orange color for these different entries. For example, if you think that you would like to have a different color for population, you can select the entry from here and you can change the color simply by clicking over here on this drop down menu, and you can assign the color like this. So I think this is a pretty cool color combination, light green and blue. And similar to what we discussed before, when you hover your mouse pointer over here, you can see that what appears is in this case the name of the country and the nominal GDP. And if you happen to change the mouse pointer to the top column, you can see that the data card also adjusts accordingly. Alright, now if I head back to this second type of chart, which is this clustered column, it's actually going to be quite similar, but instead of the columns getting stacked on top of each other, what it's going to do is it's going to cluster them just like this. So you can see that within the geographical boundaries of each of these different countries, you can see that now we get to have two different columns like this, where the column on the left side is showing us the population and the column on the right side is showing us the nominal GDP. Again, if you would like to switch the position of these two columns around, all you have to do is simply head over to this height box and move the entry as you wish. So in this case, if I drop it down to the bottom, you can see that the orientation of the columns actually just got switched, and the rest of the information are basically the same as what we discussed just a few minutes ago. And if you would like to display certain information on the map itself, you can actually click over here on this map labels button, which will enable the labels. In this case, what happens is that if I click over here, it's going to display the name of the country. Now, this might be helpful in certain cases, but I feel like if I retain these labels, it's actually going to make my map a bit messy. So I personally would like to turn this one off, but of course your preference might be completely different. And if you're not really keen on using a globe to do this kind of visualizations, but if you would like to create a flat map, you also can use this button that you can see over here, which will kind of flatten this out. So I guess it would kind of defeat the purpose of having this kind of a 3D column if you flatten this one out. But still, it's good to know that you do have this functionality if you need to do that. And I would like to turn this one off and return back to having a globe instead of a flat map. And with that, I think we can head over to the next type of chart that we are going to discuss in this tutorial, and that's going to be the bubble type of chart, or you can even call this a pie chart. Well, let me go ahead and turn off the labels as well. And you can see immediately what happens with the pie chart is that the clustered columns are actually getting transformed into this kind of a pie chart representation. And you can also scale up or down the size of the pie charts like this. Again, even though it increases the size, you can see that it's actually linearly increasing the size of all the different pie charts, so that with respect to each other, it'll still maintain the differences that it's supposed to have when representing these kind of different data. And you can of course increase the thickness, and when you do that, you will see that it's getting extruded a bit outwards from the map surface. I think you can see that clearly if you were to change the orientation just like this. However, caution must be exercised when using pie charts, because this kind of information might not necessarily be the best type of information to actually visualize using pie charts, because these two are two different types of information that we might not be able to group together under a unique characteristic. Off the top of my head, what I can think of is if you have a dataset which explains the transportation preferences of people of each of these different countries, like the number of people or the percentage of people who would prefer to use motorbikes, buses, cars, trains, these kind of different transportation methods, because when you have that kind of a dataset, you can identify a common characteristic, and representing those kinds of different preferences of the people in this kind of a pie chart would actually be much more meaningful, so that from the entire pie you can see that what sort of a fraction would prefer to use motorbikes, what sort of a fraction would prefer to use cars, and what sort of fraction would prefer to use public transportation, things like that. However, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm not going to go there, but you guys get the basic idea of what we can actually do, or how we can quickly and easily generate a chart like this just in a matter of few seconds. Alright guys, now I'm going to head back to the dataset again. And over here on the same data table, you can see that now I have added one extra column called population category. Now the reason for this is that I would like to show you how you can use the category option in the Excel 3D maps. And over here what you can see is that I have two different categories. Some entries show you the population values that are less than 10 million, and at the same time you can see that some countries are having population that are greater than 10 million. So with this new dataset, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to head over to Insert and create a new 3D map. And as you can see, we have the previous tour that we opened. I'm just going to delete this tour, and I'm going to again create a new map. And as expected, under the field list, what you can see is basically 4 different fields, including the country or territory. And these 2 columns are the columns that we had before. And additionally, now we have a population category field like this. So I'm going to add the corresponding fields to location first. It should be the country or the territory, and automatically it identified the appropriate field. And under height, this time I'm just going to add just the population. And instead of using a column chart, I think it would be more appropriate to use a bubble type of a chart, because then visually it'll be much more clear. And I'm going to open the layer options, and I'm just going to adjust the sizes of the different bubbles and maybe adjust the thickness as well. And what I would like to discuss is how to actually make use of this category option. So now what you see over here is basically the population of different countries, but I would like to categorize them or reclassify them based on the population of each of the different countries. And the way how I'm going to define my thresholds are basically using that additional column which I added over here. I'm going to classify the countries that are having population less than 10 million in one way, and classify the countries that are having population that's more than 10 million in another way. So that kind of a segmentation you can do simply by using this category option. So what you can do is you can select the population category, and what you can immediately notice is that even though the value itself didn't change, you can see that now some bubbles are actually represented in this orange color, and some bubbles happen to be in this blue color. So if I increase the size just a little bit more, now you can see that there has been a categorization that the countries that are having populations less than 10 million are actually colored in orange color, and the countries that are having population greater than 10 million are being colored in this blue color, as you can see over here. However, if you would like to make changes to the appearance, you can do that as well. For example, the greater than 10 million, if you would like to assign a different color. Now I would like to keep it in blue, but let's say for the less than 10 million, I would like to assign red color like this, so that you can quite clearly see the less populated countries in this manner. So I guess using this simple example, you actually understood how to use this category option. So to simply put, you can use this category option to reclassify your datasets based on certain defined criteria. It's not going to change the values of the datasets itself, but it's going to group all the entries that are having common properties and represent them in one color. And the number of different groups or clusters that you would like to have depends on how you categorize or how you have reclassified your entire dataset. Alright guys, with that I'm going to move on to the next type of chart that I'm going to discuss with you guys today, and that's how to create a heat map type chart using Excel 3D maps. And to demonstrate the heat map functionality of Microsoft Excel 3D maps, I'm going to use this dataset, which is showing us different traffic accidents that actually happened in New York City in the United States. At these particular locations, you can see that we have the latitude and longitude of the crash site. We have the zip code, the region, the crash time, and the date, as well as information pertaining to the contributing factors and the type of the vehicle that was involved in the crash. So before we jump in, I would also like to actually point out that heat maps are type of maps that can be used as a visualization technique to show magnitudes of a certain phenomena as a distribution of colors. And the intensity of the color can actually depict the seriousness of the variable that you're talking about. Now in this case, let's say if the color happens to be quite dark, that would indicate that that region happens to have recorded quite a high density of crashes, and that could also be helpful in deriving certain conclusions, like properly understanding why a specific region is actually quite prone to having traffic accidents, whereas the surrounding neighborhoods actually record a relatively low amount of crashes. Or if you're using this kind of a heat map to actually represent the crime incidence of a particular region. Just by looking at a heat map, we will also be able to understand which areas we potentially might need to avoid. Let's say if you're planning a trip or if you're planning to move to a certain neighborhood, such kind of a heat map actually can provide you with helpful information in making a proper decision. So that's exactly what we are going to do, and it's comforting to know that Microsoft Excel 3D maps can create heat maps without having to use any external software packages. So similar to what I did before, I'm just going to select the entire data table. As you can see, it's a data table with 74,882 entries, so that's quite a number of entries. And if I look at the crash date, it seems like the date range is starting from 1st of January of year 2020, and it's going all the way up to the month of August in 2020. And in order to insert the 3D map, I'm going to head over to Insert and click on Open 3D Maps. And just as expected, you can see that it actually identified these different fields, and when specifying the location, you can actually specify the neighborhood or the city using this field, or since we have the latitude and longitude information directly, what we can also do is we can make use of these two fields to directly plot the points on the map. So I'm going to add two fields in this case for the location. It'll be latitude and longitude, and conveniently enough, you can see that it managed to actually detect and assign the corresponding option to latitude and longitude fields accordingly. And along with that, you can see this kind of representation in New York City. Now, we might not be able to see the points individually because right now the size of the points might be a bit too much. So if I slide this to the left side, I think you will start seeing the different points in this kind of a manner. So if I zoom in just a little bit, I will have the option to increase the point size. So as you can see, all of these different points are actually referring to a specific accident site. And based on the density of the spread of these points, we might be able to get a quick glance on areas that potentially might be susceptible to frequent accidents. And we don't really have to go through the trouble of doing that manually by inspecting the points like this. And that's exactly why we have this heat map option. So now if I were to click on this change the visualization to a heat map button, you can see that immediately it got changed to this kind of a heat map representation. However, we still have a couple of things to do. We can change the color scale over here, and if you reduce the color scale, we can sort of narrow down and hone in on the areas that are supposed to be identified as areas with very high density of accidents. So over here you can see that if I reduce the color scale like this, it's kind of isolating the areas that can be regarded as areas with very high density of accidents. And also we can adjust the radius of influence. For example, we will have to keep the radius of influence in such kind of a manner that it can generate this sort of a uniform distribution of colors, because if you happen to assign a very low radius of influence, you can see that the continuity of the map kind of breaks. So to avoid that, we can also adjust the radius of influence from each of the different points like this. And again, at the same time, you can tweak the colors in such kind of a way that you can really narrow down those areas that are susceptible to having frequent traffic accidents. However, if you're not really happy with the default color system, you can also change the color system manually by heading over here to these colors, and you can assign some custom colors. For example, if we assign this kind of a light red to areas that can be regarded as relatively safe with less frequent accidents, and if you assign dark red to the other side of the spectrum, again you sort of are able to see the hotspots in this manner. And every time when you make a change, you might have to change the scales accordingly like this. And especially when dealing with heat maps, it would also be good to change the opacity just a little bit so that you can see the underlying area, especially if you decide to use the map labels like this. If I come to the conclusion that this area over here looks like a hotspot, with the underlying labeling, I might also be able to get an idea about the actual location. And guys, you can filter out this information again using certain criteria. For example, if you can recall the original data table, over here you can see different contributing factors, and we also have the vehicle type. Now let's say if you decide to do a classification based on the type of the vehicle, you can filter it out like this, and under filters, if you add a filter, and I selected the vehicle type, and from here, let's say if I were to go ahead and select maybe the accidents that only involve sedans. If I even put this back to the original set of colors like this, so this map is basically only reflective of the areas where specifically a sedan was involved in the corresponding accident. So it could give us some indications that probably the infrastructure development in this area might have something to do with that. I'm not really sure, but we can come to that sort of conclusions when we have a heat map like this. And similarly, you can play around with the different categorizations as well. Let's say if I were to remove this and add a different filter, this time involving the contributing factor. And as you can see, we have quite a number of contributing factors. And for example, if you scroll down and select an item like disregarding traffic control. And as soon as you do that, you will see that we will have to adjust our radius of influence just a bit along with the color scale, I guess. And the conclusion that we can arrive at using this kind of map is that it's highly dangerous to disregard the traffic control at these particular areas, because that have definitely led towards having frequent accidents in locations that have been marked over here in this brown color. So I guess you guys get the basic idea how we can make use of this kind of a heat map and how to do that quite simply and easily using Microsoft Excel. So with that, guys, we are going to head over to the final example that I'm going to demonstrate to you guys. It has been quite a long tutorial. However, with this final example, I think we are pretty much going to cover everything that you need to know when using Microsoft Excel 3D maps. Alright guys, so this dataset is going to be our final dataset that we're going to discuss today. And what you can see is basically a list of countries which are members of the United Nations and the date it was admitted as a member of the United Nations. So what's special of this dataset compared to the others is we have this time element in this dataset. And by using Excel 3D maps, we actually can make use of this time element to create a temporal animation map that can show us which country joined during which period in the form of an animation. What we are going to do is we are going to select the entire table again, similar to what we did before. And we can head over to Insert and head over to 3D maps and open the 3D map. And you can see that automatically it managed to identify the corresponding column which is supposed to be under this location, which is this UN member state. And the assignment has been done properly. And for this particular example, we don't necessarily have to have height column, but instead, as soon as we had the date column, you can see that there is this additional function which allows us to input the time as a separate field. So under time, I'm going to select the date of admission. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be time. And as soon as I do that, you can see that two things actually appeared. The first one being this date time dialog box, which you can activate or deactivate again using this button over here. And also we have a timeline along with a slider. And what we can do is we can move it around like this. And as I'm moving this to the right side, you can see that the dots actually starts to appear. So you guys get the idea that as I'm sliding this to the right side, you can see on the top left corner of the map screen that the time is actually changing. And along with that, you can see that visually it's indicating to us which countries joined the United Nations during these different periods. However, I would like to make a couple of changes. Now over here, I think for this particular dataset, it doesn't really make sense to have this time over here because what we have as information in our original dataset table is just the date, month and the year. So you can make those kind of changes to this particular date time box simply by right clicking over here, and you can go to edit, and from here you can edit the time format. And in this case, we can just completely ignore time altogether and only rely on having the date. And there are so many different formats that we can actually use. And if you decide that you even would like to skip the date and only retain the month and the year, you can select something like this. But in this case, I would like to maybe go with this. And of course, you can make the changes accordingly to the font size and the font colors as well. But for me, I think this is good enough. So I'm going to accept this. And you also can move this around. I'm going to keep this closer to the timeline. Now you have a choice to actually make regarding the type of chart that you would like to display. Now having a stacked column type of a chart also does work, as long as you increase the size just a little bit so that you will be clearly able to see which country got added to the United Nations as we move this timeline forward. However, I think that for this particular example, it would be much convenient if we use this regional visualization like this, so that we would be able to see exactly which country got added to the United Nations without actually having to notice a tiny dot. And you also can make the other changes accordingly as you wish. For example, if you would like to decrease the opacity, you can do that as well. And the same things that we basically discussed all this time. And if you head over to this scene options, you can basically give it a name. So I'm just going to name this one as test. And over here, what you can see is basically the scene duration. So we have the start date over here and the end date automatically detected based on our original data set. And for this animation to go from 1945 to 2011, it takes 10 seconds according to this default setting. However, if you would like to slow things down a bit, you can even go ahead and increase this so that you allow a bit more time for it to move from 1945 to 2011, so that the movements will not be so rapid, so that you'll still be able to actually visually see the changes as it's happening. And you also can adjust that using this speed slider over here. If you lower the speed, you can see the duration is increasing, and vice versa. If you increase the speed, the duration is decreasing. So let's set this one to be about, I think about 33 seconds or 34 seconds should be fine. And while the animation is taking place, you also can add an effect. Now, for example, let's say if you would like to rotate the globe as the animations are taking place, you can click over here on rotate globe, for which you also can actually adjust the speed. So let's say we put the speed to be about 3/4 like this. And once you're done with everything, you can head over to this play tour button and click on this triangle for the tour to actually take place. So over here you can see as the time is changing, different countries are actually getting highlighted accordingly. And to stop this animation, you can just hit escape. And if you think that the globe was moving a bit too fast, you can always head over to scene options and you can reduce the effect speed like this. I think I would much rather keep it somewhere around here. And I think it's better to keep this one somewhere on the globe itself so that it'll be a bit more apparent the time. And after that, you can again do a test run simply by clicking over here. And now you can see that as the time progresses, these different countries are actually getting admitted to be a part of the United Nations. So I'll cancel this out, and I guess you guys get the basic idea how this whole thing works. And you also can use this functionality to actually display different types of data depending on your specific requirement. And if you would like to change the type of the globe, you even can head over to these themes and maybe select a different map like this. For example, if you go with Arial color, you will see that instead of having the previous map, now it turns out to be some sort of a satellite view, and you still will be able to use this kind of representation for your tour as well. And if you would like to create an animation in the form of a video, you can do that as well by heading over to this create video option. You can see that it's asking whether we opt to use the maximum quality, and I think we'll go with that. And also we have the option to add a soundtrack, but for this case I think I might not add a soundtrack. And after that, all you have to do is just hit create and just save your file like this. I'm just going to keep the default name, and it's going to get saved in MP4 format. You can see that now it's creating a video of about 30 seconds or about 33 seconds as I assigned before. So it's going to take a while. And once it's done, you can just go ahead and close this. And if I open the tour, this is basically how it's going to look. And as you can see, it's going to be much more smooth because this is a fully rendered video. So it's going to be obviously a bit more smooth. Alright guys, with that, I think we come to the end of this video. We did cover quite a lot of things, and I hope by now you guys have a very solid understanding on the different capabilities of Microsoft Excel 3D maps. So guys, if you do have any questions, you can always add a comment down below and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And if you did like the tutorial, you can show your support by hitting that like button. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel as well if you would like to stay tuned and get notified immediately as soon as we upload a new video on this channel. So I'll see you guys again very soon. Until then, take care.